we have MEA, we have MOCA, right, the M's. Now we have MRA, minimum reception altitude. What the FAA is saying on this one is it's the minimum altitude in order to positively identify an intersection. An intersection. Note that the MEA, 3,700 feet, 3,700 feet, we're guaranteed navigation, we're guaranteed obstruction clearance, but in order to positively identify Brawl intersection, MRA, minimum reception altitude, you need to be at 4,500. I'm gonna look it up. In the AIM, the definition, I'm not gonna trust Wikipedia. That's not what I want. It's definitely not. Now let's just go with this link because it looks to be accurate. In navigation, minimum reception altitude is the lowest altitude in an airway segment where an aircraft can be assured of receiving signals from off-course navigation aids like VORs that define a fix. So in order to positively identify that fix, Brawl intersection, you need to be at the MRA, minimum reception altitude. When the MRA at the fix is higher than the MEA, an MRA is established for the fix, and the lowest altitude at which an intersection can be determined. When the MRA at the fix is higher, an MRA is established for the fix and is the lowest altitude at which the intersection can be determined. So in order to determine that intersection, let's come back to that one later.
Is that an off-course navigate then?
It's to identify it. Let me look it up under the FAR info. Oh, actually, use your book. Look up MRA. Let's see what the definition is.
Minimum reception altitude.
What does it say?
Minimum reception altitude.
Yeah, what page? No, that's just what's the
Yeah, I'm
abbreviation.
reading off of the appendix.
Yeah, no, look under the index, not the appendix. I'm looking up the definition.
Yeah, 5-11.
What does the 5-11 say?
The lowest altitude that ensures adequate reception of the navigation signals forming an intersection or other fix.
Okay, so even though the MEA is lower, again, in order to positively identify that fix, you have to be at that altitude. We'll visit that one later. Just, that's the definition.
It's like Wi-Fi throwing in the sky.
What's that?
It's like Wi-Fi throwing in the sky.
Sure.
With the reach out.
That was, that's how you define all these numbers. And I think that was all the numbers. There's another number on here. You know how like on VFR charts they have the MEF in the quadrangles? What's the MEF stand for in quadrangles? Like this number here on a VFR chart?
Elevation figure.
Maximum elevation figure, right? They round it up to the next 100. And then if it's a natural obstruction, like i.e. a mountain, they add 200 feet and round up. If it's not a natural, like a building, they'll round up 100 feet. So it's the highest obstacle, rounded up to the next 100, plus 100 for non, if it's like mountainous, i.e. things might change, like a tree is growing, right? Or it can't absolutely be determined exact. They'll add 200 feet. So that's your maximum elevation figure. So on a VFR chart, if you go to this number here, you're gonna be skimming something. You're gonna be pretty friggin' close. They're just saying, heads up. Well, in this case, it's called an OROCA. What does the book say about OROCA? says something about off-road, off-route,
Off-route.
i.e. if you're not on the route, you have off-route obstruction clearance altitude.
Off-route, obstruction, clearance altitude.
Off-route obstruction clearance altitude. How does the FAA define it? What are you given? What are you given? What are the numbers? It provides obstruction clearance with a 1,000-foot buffer. In all, does it say anything about mountainous?
So, I'm getting, oh yeah, it's from FAA.gov, so it's an off-route obstruction clearance, called an ORCA, is an off-route altitude that provides obstruction clearance with a 1,000-foot buffer in a non-mountainous terrain areas and a 2,000-foot buffer in designated mountainous areas within the UPS.
In addition, the altitudes are not assessed for nav-aid signal coverages, air traffic control surveillance, or communications coverage, and are published for general situation awareness, flight planning, and in-flight contingency use. What does that mean, in-flight contingency use?
The out front.
There's a problem, right? So if I'm navigating, right, and then all of a sudden I find myself lost nav. Wait a second, I'm coming down here on Victor 208 with the continuance of 314, and I have total electrical failure. I don't have nav aids anymore. What am I gonna do? I can't navigate this airway because I just lost all my nav systems. It's an emergency use. I would immediately climb to 13,100 feet and start to figure things out. Because if I'm anywhere in this quadrangle, if I'm anywhere in that quadrangle, right, I'm not gonna see fit. So the FAA has built-ins, that's the OROCA, off-route obstacle clearance altitude, giving me 1,000-foot non-mountainous, 2,000-foot mountainous terrain. It does not guarantee navigation. It does not guarantee communication. Nothing in the instrument environment guarantees communication, but it would be if there's a contingency, i.e. I had a problem and there's an emergency and I don't want to run into anything. I would climb to that altitude. Because if I look in this quadrangle and I go over to the VFR chart, 11,200 feet, there's some obstacles in here. And all of a sudden I find myself off the airway. Well, if I climb to that, I'm good.
So that was the 2,000, because that's a mountainous terrain.
2,000 in mountainous terrain. And remember, the maximum elevation figure in mountainous is giving us 200 plus whatever's added up to. So 13.1 is guaranteeing me 2,000 feet. So now emergency use. 13.1, climb to, I don't know where I'm at, but I know I'm in here. If I continue to the west from there, okay, in this region it's 10.6. In this region it's 4.5. There's also something else that's gonna be utilized for that, which we'll talk about later in the semester for emergency uses, okay? There's another M. The other M is MSA. MSA values are not found on a low altitude and route chart. MSA values are found on an IAP, Instrument Approach Procedure. But that's the other depicted altitude that the FAA gives us for safety in the event of, like I said, what ifs. What if I go lost nav right now? What do? I don't want to run into anything. I'm gonna have to climb to a value. In this case, if you're navigating on a low altitude route chart, 13.1 or ROCA, or on an IAP, I'll show you just for giggles.
So MSA is minimum safe altitude.
Minimum sector altitude. It used to be minimum safe altitude. It used to be minimum sector altitude. The FAA is invoking this whole thing with aeronautical decision making, utilizing the word safety and everything. So if you looked it up, MSA, you would find minimum safe altitude, but in some publications you might find minimum safe sector altitude. In auto publications, you'd find minimum sector altitude. And I'll give you an example of it. Found on every IAP, instrument approach procedure, and this is what an approach procedure, we've looked at it briefly. There's your MSA value here. And the reason they call them sectors is it's because not on every approach plate is it broken into sectors, but in this case, your sector of 270 inbound to Mission Bay to 190, it's hard to read, inbound to Mission Bay, if you're within 25 nautical miles, there's your minimum safe altitude. Circle, climb, figure things out. So en route phase of flight, the FAA gives you the OROCA on the low altitude route chart. On the instrument approach procedure, the FAA gives you the MSA value. Good? So we have MEA, MRA, MCA, right? MSA, OROCA. There's one more M that's denoted on here, and there's one up to the north that I'm not going to trouble us with and look for. The value is called MAA, maximum allowed altitude, or authorized. This looks all of a sudden blurry.
I wouldn't consider zooming in the Microsoft Edge. I would just zoom in with the plus or minus.
Yeah, I'm trying to find 100% again. There we go. There we go. One more value, MAA. It would say next to it, MAA of maximum allowed altitude or maximum authorized altitude. And that altitude is an altitude at which you're not getting interference from other nav aids. Or there's an overlying airspace that they don't want you to go above into. Maximum. The MAA is the only maximum of the M's. Good? Go for it.
So you climb high enough, you might see like a view a lot farther beyond or something?
You might get interference from a nav signal. You might be encroaching upon another route. You might be going into jet airways. You might be whatever it is. FAA's definition.
It's in the book. You wanna read it?
Yeah, go for it.
Alright. Occasionally, it is necessary to establish a maximum authorized altitude, MAA, for a route segment. At higher altitudes, you might be able to receive 2 or more VOR stations simultaneously on the same frequency, making the signals unreliable for navigation. MAA is the highest altitude you can fly based on the line of sight transmitting distance of VOR or VORTAC stations using the same frequency. It guarantees that you will only receive 1 signal at a time on a given frequency. The maximum authorized altitude is shown on the chart with the letters MAA followed by the altitude, either in feet or as a flight level.
There you go. Good? Those are your M's. MRA, MCA, MEA, MSA, MAA, OROCA, off route for emergency use, contingency. I've lost navigation, I don't want to CFIN. Good? MSA, the other safety, minimum safe altitude based on sectors, but that's found on an IAP, instrument approach plate or instrument approach procedure, which would be located here. Good? Questions? All right. Let's look at colorations of airports now. So basically, from the knowledge that we just discussed, we can pick any airway. Let's pick this airway here. What's the airway? Victor 201, it starts at this VOR here, Palmdale. Okay? It's a high VOR, high TACAN, which gives us high DME service volume. And let's just start at the VOR itself, the VOR TAC, and let's work southwestbound and just verify that we know the numbers. So, immediately off the bat, I see a value in an X. What's that one again? MCA, and here's the values. So if I was southwestbound on Victor 201, is there an MCA present for it? No. So what's the MEA on the route going to be? 7,500 feet. But if I was southeastbound on Victor 197, well, then I do have an MCA of 8,700 feet southeastbound here. If I was eastbound on Victor 137, which is here, it does have an MCA value of 7,000 feet. Or if I was southwestbound on Victor 518, it does show an MCA value of 6,300 feet. So I'd have to be sure to pass the VOR at or above that value. Flight planning, that's on the pilot. Remember, the MEA values for any low altitude route chart is just the lowest you can fly at. No one's saying you can't fly higher. It's just the absolute lowest to give you 1,000 foot non-mountainous, 2,000 foot mountainous, guaranteed navigation, 4 miles wide either side of the center line, not guaranteed communication. Good? So, let's work southwestbound on Victor 201. What's the radial that I'm going off of for Victor 201 initially? The 189 radial. So magnetic. Again, this is magnetic north. That's magnetic south, southwest. Right? South, southwest. What's the segment distance from the VOR up to Soled intersection? 11 miles. What's the MEA? 75. What do we find at Soled? An MCA. Where's that MCA listed? That's an interesting one.
Oh yeah, right. Palmdale?
Right at the top. Yeah, there you go.
That's the Palmdale.
That's for Palmdale though.
To the left, there's a.
That's for Saugus.
It's just below it, to the left.
Right there. Victor 201, southbound, 8,400 feet. See how you kind of have to dig around for those? It might be a good idea prior to flight to figure these things out and to have this in your flight plan, because sometimes they're not the easiest things to co-locate. Right below it, Victor 201, 8,400 feet south. What does that mean? There's a change, right? So 7,500, but we have to pass to 8,400. So we would calculate 200 feet per nautical mile at minimum. But I would probably use the climb rate based in my aircraft's operating handbook to figure out either where I should start the climb, or better yet, well, pick my routing higher than the MCA to begin with. If I was southwestbound and the 8,400 feet is the MCA, what would be the next proper Victor Airway altitude to select? What would the proper altitude be, minimum, if you're southwestbound? 10,000 feet. Why'd you get 10,000?
Because you're going west, you gotta be even.
Because you're going west and it has to be even. So above 8,400 would be 9. Well, that's not gonna work because that would be eastbound, so it's 10,000 feet, right? So if I was going down this way anyways, I'd probably pick 10,000 to begin with, so I don't even have to deal with that climb. So I'm coming down the MEA, 8,800. I'm at 10,000 anyways. Does that make sense? Bro.
Wait, say that one more time.
So if the MEA is 8,800, what altitude would I be at anyways?
You're at 10.
I'm gonna be up or climbing up to 10,
Right.
right? The total segment distance from this VOR to whatever the next VOR is, from
It's 46.
total distance 46 miles, right? The segment distance from Soled to lower altitudes, because 4 nautical miles wide to either side of the center line might change a little bit. The benefit is to be able to get tighter in between mountains. There's a multitude of benefits. We'll watch, actually, we're gonna take a break now. We're gonna watch a couple of videos off of FAA TV. We'll watch one about next generation and the National Airspace System. And we'll watch one, which we're gonna start to talk about next. Remember when I said the order of the book, like departures, arrivals, then en-route charts? We'll look at a National Airspace System on next generation. We'll look at some departures, and then we will look at an FAA video on a local departure called the zoo departure. It'll kind of define things a little bit better then. Good? Cool. All right, let's take a little bit of a break, and then we'll resume for some videos and departures. Before getting into the airspace. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I worked with an instructor 20 years ago who was on with SoCal. SoCal cleared him through the airspace. Here, it's 18 to 3200. And he opted to, he was under IFR. Here. And he got assigned 3,000 feet going through here. He was about here in 18 to 3200. He said, I'd like to cancel IFR. And the controller said, okay, IFR cancellation received. Here's a phone number for you. He canceled IFR because you don't need to get a Bravo clearance under IFR. There is no airspace now under IFR. There is, but you're not getting cleared through the airspace under IFR. And this instructor did it. He did it twice. He got what's called the 709 ride, remedial training. South line for Qantas.
So what did you do?
It was like 20 years ago.
So what was his mistake there?
He just canceled. He was in the smack middle of Bravo. Between 18 and 32, they assigned him 3,000. He was here, and he said, I'd like to cancel IFR.
And they didn't just say, no, you can't, right?
No, they said, okay,
Sure.
IFR cancellation received.
Yeah.
By the way, here's the phone number. You just busted Bravo.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but the surface areas really are owned by that controlling authority. However, SoCal can tag you up going through or over the top of Miramar. But down here, SoCal wants nothing to do with you. That's the controlling area at the surface.
So let's say you're coming somewhere from Mexico and you want to cross.
You're not.
No.
And here's the reason. If you're coming from Mexico in a small light civil aircraft, small light, and you're not in a jet, you're not going to an airport of entry that's elsewhere. You have to stop here to clear customs. They're called airport of entries. I don't know why Brown's not tagged up as an AOE anymore, but if you look at LA. If you look at,
So what do you tell them? I promise you I don't have any drugs on the plane?
yeah, they bring dogs out.
Oh, so you have to physically land. It's not
Yeah,
like
you have to
just
land.
getting
You have to
clicked.
land at an AOE. And it's
I was like, yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm good.
You're getting cuffed immediately. You would have to land at an airport that's designated as an airport of entry prior to, in like a 172 or 182. Unless you have prior arrangements made in your citation and you're going straight to Palm Springs. But you have to land at a airport that has that.
Okay.
And that is TSA.
For private flights coming from Mexico is probably brownfields that won't stop, right? And
Yeah.
then go wherever you go.
Yeah, I used to fly down to Baja all the time to go fishing. And we would always, out of Montgomery, we would fly out and go do our thing in Mexico. But you would land in San Felipe if we're going down to Baja as Mexico's airport of entry. Declare what we're doing.
Yeah, so same.
Pay for, now in Mexico, you have to pay for use of airspace. So you'd say, hey, this is my flight plan, this is what I'm doing. They're gonna be like, okay, you're gonna be this many miles in, this is what it's gonna cost you. But then coming back home, you would land at Brown, clear customs, and then be on your way from there.
You have to prepay for your airspace.
You pay for your airspace use in Mexico at your airport of entry. No single engine flights at night in Mexico. The rulings are a little bit different. Yeah, but you can land wherever you want. Like we used to go down to like Abreojos, Punta San Francisco, just land on the beach. Mulaje, Loreto is where you pick up fuel because all the other airports like San Felipe, you'd have to call and say, hey, is fuel available or can you make it available? And they would come out with jugs, like jerry cans. And fill it, and you're like, is that the right color? As there's heavily armed individuals with their dogs who are a little skeptical.
Those towns really had like paved roads like recently, like 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look
Probably
at Puerto
less than that.
Nuevo now. When I used to go down to Puerto Nuevo, it was just a giant dust bowl. It's paved now.
Yeah, San Loreto is it's by comparison of all the other towns around Mulaje and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's a bigger one, but it's still, no bigger than Old Town.
Yeah,
here in
I
San
mean,
Diego,
Loreto
something
is a
like that.
town though.
Yeah.
I love going into Mulaje. I've got some funny stories about Mulaje that I'm not gonna repeat. Yeah, we've had some good times. All right, cool. So we're gonna watch 2 videos, or maybe 3. 2 videos on the National Airspace System, how it works. We're gonna watch a video on Next Gen. Next Gen, we'll watch this, actually, let's say, on Next Gen itself. Next Gen, how it works, and then a flight experience on Next Gen. Okay? Then we're gonna look at departure procedures, a departure procedure, and what you're gonna find is when we look at these things called DPs, and this is something you definitely wanna know. The DPs are classified technically under 2 variants. A DP is a departure procedure. Under a DP, there's really 2 kinds. There's an SID, standardized instrument departure, and then there's an ODP, obstacle departure procedure. Obstacle departure procedures are just exactly that. They're designated to, they're textual in format 95% of the time. And they just basically say, hey, here's how you're gonna get out of here without running into anything. A SID, a standardized instrument departure, is graphical in nature. It could be assigned. You have to have it on board. We're gonna look at a SID. And like I said, what you guys are gonna see is, after we covered low altitude and route charts, reading a SID is really easy. Really easy. It's just gonna be like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So kind of working backwards. And then after we look at a SID or 2, we're going to look at an FAA TV video, which John might help clarify some of the questions you just asked about, well, why aren't I running? Because they talk about it. Cool? So the order of the videos will be Next Gen today. They talk about the system and the benefits. Next Gen was something that was supposed to be, they kept on pushing off the date of implementation. They kept on saying, well, okay, 2017, don't quote the dates, 2017, 2019, 2021, 2025. They're trying to get everyone into this next generation system to do what the videos are going to tell us what they're supposed to do. So, that being said, I think, so, I thought this was my voice. The idea of data communication is provide communication between pilots and controllers. It offers direct link between ground automation and flight deck avionics. They can, through transponder now, automated, give you your clearances. Automated, change things up. Automated, if you see something that says D-ATIS, digital ATIS. If they have something called computer data link, they can link the computers to minimize the possibility of human error. It gives, well, this whole idea is to the success of next generation operations It enables efficiencies not possible during the voice system. Expect to save operators more than $10 billion and about $1 billion in FAA operating costs, i.e. it's limiting the amount of transmissions, limiting the amount of personnel time, limiting the amount of errors, and increasing efficiencies of the system. Controllers send routine instructions directly to the flight deck, so they can minimize time in the air, minimize fuel burn, and then there's fewer weather delays. This isn't the video that I actually wanted to watch. Expansion of tower departure clearance services. Initial Enroute services, departure clearance services deployed to 56 towers by the end of 2016. Digital voice communications, ATC flexibility. This will make sense when we watch another video. A big problem with the system now is this, UAS, unmanned aircraft systems. Because how do they communicate with them? How do they tell them an aircraft is coming, right? They don't want to get a resolution, an RA, through TCAS, collision avoidance system. Through aircraft, so they're able to now automatically, through digital ways, address unmanned aerial systems. Air-to-ground voice communication is no longer limited by geographical facility boundaries, i.e. VHF radios have a line of sight limit, and then greater flexibility for developing and using airspace traffic assignments. It's great that this is about voice systems, yet there's no voice. Testing will begin in the first quarter of 2017, so that's what I said initially. They wanted to implement it in 2017, it kept on getting pushed. So again, this is kind of a preview of what we're going to watch. The FAA is going to develop procedures at metroplexes to improve airspace efficiency. We're going to see that on the departure procedure. It'll talk specifically about that. Perform integrated airspace design and associated activities. Foundation for future development of PBN, performance-based navigation, i.e. GPS routing, more direct routings, reduce flight time, fuel use, flexibility to routing aircraft around weather, enables integrated airspace solutions to improve traffic flow. So again, benefit is saving time, money, which equals fuel, which equals costs. They're showing the modulation of it here. 2013, they're starting to show the design, the site evaluation, site implementation there. 2015, they're starting to get some sites on board. The metroplexes are starting to change. You're going to see San Diego here pop up as a blue in a minute. What does ADS-B stand for? Anyone? Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. What does that mean?
It sends a signal by itself.
It automatically sends a signal out. So automatically sends a signal. But what does dependent mean then? Automatic dependent seems like it's automatic, but it's dependent. What does the dependent portion mean?
Ground stations.
It's dependent upon ground facilities to be operational. A lot of people don't recognize that ADS-B, here's what you hear all the time in the air. See them on the fish finder. Yeah, don't fly with them. People say, I have my TCAS, traffic collision avoidance system. Well, most of these small light symbols, most don't have TCAS system. ADS-B sends a signal out to a ground radar facility. The ground radar facility resends that signal to any aircraft. If you want to see aircraft on your digital display, i.e. your Garmin, whatever, it comes in the form of TIS-B, Traffic Information Service Broadcast. That's where you're receiving the ADS-B that's being resent by ground radar systems, dependent. So it automatically sends out the signal, but it's dependent on ground radar systems. So now people get look, I don't see them on my iPad traffic. I don't see them there. Well, if you're outside TRACON environment, it's dependent on ground radar systems to work. Ground radar systems don't work, that's a problem, right? So it's a broadcast. So that's the provide surveillance where radar cannot be deployed, and that's ADS-B in and out enables aircraft to aircraft surveillance. That's ADS-B in. So now if every aircraft's required to have ADS-B out now, but if you don't have ADS-B in, you're not getting direct from the ADS-B out, right? if you're trying to see aircraft because of ADS-B out, you have to have traffic information service broadcast if you don't have ADS-B in. ADS-B out and in allows aircraft to see each other. Just ADS-B out doesn't, unless you have traffic information service broadcast. It provides more frequent position updates compared to radar, i.e. Integrated through your GNS, Global Navigation System. It's taking that information, latitude, longitude, coordinates, airspeed, and vector heading, and it allows air traffic controllers to say, what is this airplane doing? Why do you think it was originally invented, and why do you think it was implemented? Post 9/11, they can see threats. TSA. Continuing through, so there's that GPS technology to determine aircraft location. Next update, here's the ADS-B radio stations that are being deployed. 2013 continues. They wanted to terminal service by 2019. It didn't happen. So now they're starting to Enroute automatic modernization, provide a platform needed for the next gen operations up high. Replace old needed systems in order to be able to see aircraft. Provides real time. So here's what they're doing. They're enable key next gen capabilities of whatever they need to communicate. Conflict probe or radar controllers display. This is what it's supposed to be giving us. Initial enhancements, again, a huge one, UAS. So now that they can see UAS activity, they can vector you around or it around. Enhancements focus on identification in UAS. They're trying to change air traffic controller systems. Here's where we're coming. Phase 3. They tried. Not there yet. All of this will be revealed, like I said, in videos, but this was the whole goal of the system. This is a big one of the system. It provides reroutes, airborne reroutes around weather. Another big one, estimated times of arrival, more efficient slot delays. Again, this was their goal. Traffic, weather, other NAS standard data format, able to be sent to the cockpit or flight deck, automated, real-time flight weather information, increase agility and efficiency for the air traffic community, reduce implementation of operating costs, i.e. saving fuel. The whole goal was, by the NEMS, was to be April 2016. This was pushed back. ASDEX, airport surface detection equipment for next generation, will give surface situational awareness. What did that come from? Why do you think they wanted surface detection equipment? What was the biggest air disaster in the history? Tenerife. What happened there? Ground problems, fog, controllers, pilots, right? Not being able to see things on the ground. Terminal en route weather products available in flight. So here's all their implementation dates. And the next video will show you where we're at now. That was the goal of Next Gen. Where we're at now with the system.
Wait, so what is next gen? I mean, I know.
That was it. So next generation, what they're to Berry intersection, 17. This here is saying to change over from Palmdale at how many miles? To whatever the next one is at 19 miles, but we also found an MCA here, 7,600 feet, but that's northbound. It's northbound because you're already at 10 or 88 minimum coming southbound. So we continue through. The MEA drops down to 5,000. So if I was at 10,000 here, and let's just say I'm on a descent profile, I cross here at Berry intersection, I can immediately start descending down to, well, 6,000 feet if I was normalized. And I say if I was normalized for the reason of, again, what if? And we're gonna talk about that one later. Because the FAA does have priorities or what they want you to do as far as altitude and as far as routing is concerned if in the event you're lost communications. Okay? That acronym is MEA and AVI. They want you to fly at the minimum en route altitude, the minimum expected altitude, or the minimum assigned altitude if you're lost navigation. So whatever's the highest of those three, MEA. Don't worry about it now, we're gonna talk about it later. But again, minimum en route altitude, expected or assigned altitude, whatever's the highest of the three, and then AVEF, assigned for routing. Assigned, vectored, expected, or filed is the route you would fly. Again, don't worry about that, we're gonna talk about it later. The whole thing is designed for this. In the event that you go lost comm, what do you do to stay safe with it? Good? So, we're coming down, we'll probably be at 6. We come down to the next VOR, which is LAX. So here's an interesting one off the LAX VOR, which I think it's still on here. There's another little symbol off of the airways, and I'm gonna have to find it. It's a CNF, a computer navigation fix, and I don't know if it's still on here, but I'm gonna look for it. It is. I'm only gonna spend a second looking for it. If not, we'll see it at some point. No, I'm not seeing it. Something labeled, it's a little X that is instead of a triangle at an intersection. It's a little X versus a triangle at an intersection. Like these are the triangles that fixes.
Yeah.
It's a little X.
There's one off of Victor 210.
Where do you see it?
Off LAX on 210, down farther. Oh, Van Noy's down by LAX, off 210 to the right, farther to the right. By Downey, down, straight down from where you are, go to the right. Keep going right on that one.
Oh, yeah.
The X, that's right above you.
Oh yeah, Wujek, there it is right there. So that doesn't have any ATC purpose, none. It's a computer navigation fix specified as a CNF, and it would aid pilots to say, hey, the turn is coming up, but ATC would never assign it. Okay? It's a fix that's a non-ATC related fix for the en route phase of flight. And that little X again is called a computer navigation fix. Sam?
No, is it just because they just drew it that way? Because technically speaking, if you're going that one, I can't. Is it Donnie or down?
Downey?
Yeah, so right from Downey.
So see how there's a turn here and then a turn here?
Yeah, so from
I can aid the pilots for that turn. Heads up, there's a turn coming in the pilot's computer. But like I said, it won't be assigned by ATC. It's just a computer navigation fix. Someone look it up. Look up computer navigation fix and see what the FAA's definition is.
But point is this: like if you're, sorry.
Sorry, you go.
So point is this: if I'm going Victor 210,
Yep.
and I'm going eastbound,
Yep.
from Downey, I would just shoot a shot straight to Adam, right? Or is it Piro?
Yeah, but what they're saying is you have to be on the airway. And at this point, you would transition over to the 225 radial here.
Oh, okay.
So where those start to converge, hey, I need to make that turn. But the computer navigation fix would be like, on board the aircraft flight management system. They'd be like, well, wait a second, this is where the turn happens. Find it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does the FAA say about it?
It says a computer navigation fix is a point defined by a latitude/longitude coordinate and is required to support performance-based navigation (PBN) operations. A 5-letter identifier denoting a CNF, computer navigation fix, can be found next to an X on the Enroute charts and on some approach charts. Eventually, all CNFs will be labeled and begin with the letters CF followed by 3 consonants. For example, C, F, W, E, G. CNFs are not recognized by ATC and not contained in ATC fix or automation databases and are not used for ATC purposes.
There you go. Okay, so not used for ATC purpose. It's just a heads up. There's a turn coming up. It's like your phone saying, there's a left turn coming up, but there's not a street name for it.
Is there a reason why there isn't a fix then?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know why they don't identify it as a fix. It just has no purpose. It's just a turn on the airway. Okay? That is everything that you will find along an airway. Those are all the values. Those are all the numbers. Those are all the altitudes. Let's look at airports. Are there any questions for as far as the numerical values? There are some things in here that look a little bit like daunting, like, well, what are all these things here in these like little arrow boxes like here? And it's a thin line. Look at that thin line, 233, and it says 110.8 SMO 45. It's if you only have VOR, you could identify the fix as a cross radial utilizing that. So if I'm outbound, i.e., I'm outbound, this wouldn't actually work all too well because it's kind of close together, but let's just say I'm outbound on Victor 25 coming from LA, and I want to be able to identify exert intersection, but I don't have GPS to identify EXERT. Well, I can identify the cross radial 233 at 21 miles or whatever it is off of 110.8. Good. SMO 45. If you look at UHF, no one has the terms. I'll get into that one later. Go for it.
Speaking, looking at the cockpit, if you're doing that, what you just said, would you be writing out and then waiting for that?
Waiting for that needle to come in.
Needle to.
Yep.
Okay.
Like I said, that's not really the best because it's not a pure triangulation. It might be better if you're coming this way, like off Ventura, the 129, Victor 25, 129 radial. If I'm southbound off Ventura and I want to identify exert intersection, for whatever reason, I can also use this 233 off Santa Monica. So it's a radial identifier. You can see all these radial identifiers, i.e. LAX is out of service, or whatever it be, it's a way to cross identify a radial. So I'm using 2 VORs to triangulate my position. And that's what all these little boxes or little balloons, if you will, are. Like Palmdale, off of Palmdale. Off of the 110.4 off of Palmdale. The 164 radial, bless you. The 164 radial to identify Krause intersection. So that would be a way to identify Krause, cross radial. Good? So those thin lines are called radial identification. Not an airway, but radial identification.
That's used when
If you're just VOR,
just
yeah, you don't have a way to identify. No, anything that's 5 letters would be found in a current database of your GNSS, Global Navigation Satellite System, GPS. Go for it.
It's a bit off topic, but let's say you're in a no-com situation, you're in in like heavy cloud cover or whatever it is. You're able to triangulate your position off of a VOR, but you're lost and you need a minute to like get your situation together. Is ATC, like if you file your flight plan and all that stuff, right, they should automatically keep everybody else off that flight level?
Absolutely, that's the point.
Okay, so like, so if I'm going, let's just say off this one, so if I'm going southeast and PACIF, whatever, PACIF?
Passive.
Yeah, passive. Let's just say I have no comms, but I know we're passive. I stand there, and let's just say I'm hanging out there, 7,000 feet, right? So I'm flight level 70.
No, you're not flight level. You're just 7,000 feet.
7,000 feet, sorry.
Yeah, flight level start at 18,000 feet.
My bad. So I'm
Yeah, that's when the
7,000 feet.
altimeter changes, but that's a whole different story.
Now we gotta look at that. We got it. So you got 7,000. So at that point, you can just loiter there, getting yourself in the holding pattern.
They probably don't want you to loiter for too long.
I get it. I wouldn't hang out over
Yeah.
the VOR, but like, hey, I would go to the northeast section. That way I know I'm there, and then kind of like get my act together.
Let me get into that now. So, in the IFR system, you are given a clearance, right? The clearance is based off a format called craft. This is a little bit ahead, but this is fine. Okay. The clearance is based on craft. We've talked about this a little bit in the lab class, right? Because the C is written wrong in the checklist in there. The C for craft is your clearance limit, right? Your clearance limit. The R is the routing you're expected to file or to fly. So this is what you're cleared to, but it's not really what you're cleared to. It's the point you're cleared to along your routing. Let's get into that one later. Let's just say we were given a clearance limit of our destination airport. So for whatever it is, you're cleared to the Santa Barbara airport. Via, they're gonna give you your routing. Like Victor 23, I'm just gonna make stuff up and it's probably not gonna make sense at all.
Yeah.
Victor 23 to Victor, again, numbers, to Victor 5, to Victor 3, to Victor 1, to Victor 2, right?
Sure.
Just making up numbers. Here's the altitude. So your clearance limit, your routing, your altitude, your frequency, and that's your primary departure frequency. I've heard this quite often, and I've seen it happen quite often. They give you your primary departure frequency, whether it be TRACON, Terminal Radar Approach Control, or ARTCC, Air Route Traffic Control Center. Those people are like SoCal Approach or SoCal Departure Control, TRACON, or LA Center, ARTCC. That's your frequency, and then you're given your transponder code, and that's a discrete code that's for you, right? Squawk 5211, whatever it is. So you started to get into this loss comm procedure, and again, we're going to go over this more, but I'm just going to preview it right now. Okay. So let's just say, let's make up a routing. Let's say you are cleared to, and let's keep it a simple one. You're cleared to the Long Beach Airport, right here. Long Beach, Doherty Field, it's here. And you're out of Montgomery Field, and they say, okay, you're cleared to the Long Beach Airport after departure. Fly runway heading, radar vectors oceanside. Victor 23, and Victor 23 continues here, direct.
Say it one more time.
You're cleared to the Long Beach Airport. After departure, fly runway heading, radar vectors, oceanside, Victor 23 direct. Okay, just for giggles. Again, we're gonna go over this quite in detail later. And they say something to the effect of 3,000, expect 4,000, 10 minutes after departure, departure frequency 119.6, squawk 5211. So, you're cleared to the Long Beach Airport, LGB. Your routing is radar vectors, oceanside VOR, Victor 23, direct. 3,000, expect 4,000, 10 minutes after departure. Departure frequency 119.6, squawk 52, whatever it is, 11. right off the bat, I've seen a bunch of people want to talk to air traffic control out of Montgomery Field on this frequency. That's the frequency air traffic control is going to hand you off to. That's TRACON. Okay? You're at a given altitude, and they say, okay, airplane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, contact SoCal approach off 119 on 119.6. Okay, 119.6. See you guys later. So now, your question was this, Sam. You said, what happens in the event?
So what I'm saying is, let's go off your example. So, for example, you have some system malfunction, whatever
Yep,
it is.
you go lost comm.
Yeah, lost comms or whatever it is, something in your cockpit went wrong, you're in a complete washout, right? Maybe on course, maybe you're not.
Let's just
So-
say this, though, for this scenario. Let's just say you've only gone lost comm. Okay?
Sure.
You've lost your radios.
Okay.
Keep on going.
Point is this. While I'm kind of like trying to figure out the situation, ATC knows that at some point in between Montgomery Field, heading to Oceanside, right, via direct going to
Long Beach.
Long Beach, right?
Yeah.
There's going to be an aircraft bobbing around at 4,000 feet after 10 minutes of departure, right? And then expecting them to check in at 119.6.
Yeah. They're
So
gonna
point
know.
is- So the point is this, they'll, whatever air traffic or whatever's happening, they're routing for, keep 4,000 feet clear, right?
That's
Just
the,
get-
that's the design of the system. The design of the system is, so there's, and we said this day one, there's two types of airspace in the National Airspace System. Controlled and uncontrolled. The uncontrolled is class Gulf airspace. The controlled airspace is A, B, C, D, E. So controlled versus uncontrolled. So now the question comes up, well, what's controlled airspace? Controlled airspace is airspace that offers IFR services. That's it.
Yeah.
So then the next question is, okay, well then what is IFR services? IFR services is the separation from IFR to other IFR aircraft. Okay, cool, I get that. Now how do they do it? And everyone wants to say, oh, radar. Well, maybe not, because you might be in an area that doesn't have radar. There is no radar coverage. How are they going to separate you by radar?
It's altitude assignment.
Time, speed, distance, and altitude.
Yeah.
So now they're not going to release two aircraft, they're going to impact each other on that routing. Or if there's, let's say there's two IFR aircraft that are ready to launch at the same time, and they're going on the same route, they're going to give the faster aircraft the priority to launch, right? But in this event, let's go into the lost comm procedure. Again, we're going to do this again. So what the FAA is expecting you to do as far as altitude, so there's two priorities, altitude and then route, right? So there's two parts of it. There's altitude of this and then there's the route of this. The first one is altitude. What do they want you to do? MEA is what they want you to do. And it's not just minimum en route altitude. The M is minimum en route altitude. That's right. I don't know if you guys are gonna be able to see the orange from the back. Yeah, you might be able to. The M is minimum en route altitude. The A, or the E, is expected altitude. The A is the assigned altitude. If you happen to be talking to them and they assign you a different altitude. Whatever's the highest of the three is what you're gonna climb to.
So that's requirements of IFR.
So this is in the event you go lost communications. The FAA is like, okay, like Sam said, he's like, well, what happens if I had, and I wanted to specify it by lost comm.
Yeah, I get it. So I'm up in the air.
You're up in the air, all of a sudden,
I'm
boom,
taking
you know.
off, and the last communication I had is a be at 4,000 feet after 10 minutes of takeoff.
Let's just say this, you launched airplane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're clear for takeoff. You already had the routing, you already had your altitude assignment.
Yeah.
And then you would hear them say, okay, airplane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, contact SoCal departure control 119.6. And then you go to 119.6 and, oh, SoCal, airplane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're climbing out of 1,100, climbing 3,000. Nobody's home. Wait a second. Is it my headset? Switch radios, try the different headphone jacks. You're trying everything in the cockpit. Adjusting volume, adjusting squelches, you're doing everything to do. Try to get a, hey, have your passenger, give them your headset. Try their side, try your side. What we're trying to do is incorporate obviously computer data, digital data links to aircraft to be able to make flights more efficient.
So it's a title for a project.
It's a project. The whole next gen is a
okay.
project.
Right.
Right? So the passenger experience, and what was the national exactly what you just thinking. Let's, based on that question, here, let me play this video first, because here's the passenger experience, and this will answer your question as to what are they trying to do, but on the end users, right? So here's what they're trying to do for us, the end user. Let me break it down by saying this. Who's traveled like in the early 2000s or late 90s? Some of you weren't even born then. It used to, you'd get onto the aircraft, you'd wait forever. The pilot would come on and say, yeah, we're waiting for a departure slot, it's gonna be 120 minutes. And then all of a sudden you'd be waiting in this real long line for departure. Or then when you were coming home, you would get on the ground and all of a sudden, well, ladies and gentlemen, there's no gate available for us right now, so we're just gonna be sitting here. They're trying to make the whole system more efficient. If you've flown in the next gen system, you used to fly these step down fixes where, okay, you're out of 36,000 feet for 24,000 feet, and then all of a sudden you'd be cruising again. And then you're out of 24 for 18,000 feet, and then you're cruising, right? Well, now the system, like from Houston, an aircraft could be up at flight levels at Houston, pull the engines back to idle or near idle, and come all the way in following a vertical glide path to San Diego. Pretty cool. So you can see where the efficiency changes, right? Those little winglets, what are they for? Increased efficiency, reduce induced drag. So make your fuel consumption better by something like 1 or 2 or 3%, depending on the aircraft. 1 or 2 or 3% of billions of gallons is huge. But what else they do is they break wingtip vortices. Wingtip vortices, here's a number, descend at a rate of 500 feet per minute for 2 minutes. How many feet is that? Don't hurt yourself. It's 1,000 feet, man. So what are the IFR to IFR separation of aircraft going east and west? 1,000 feet. Why? Wingtip vortices. So now if they break wingtip vortices, you might not get that 500 feet per minute descent for 2 minutes. What can they do? Reduce vertical separation minimums. It's called RVSM. Next gen systems allowing this due to RNP, required navigational performance, PBN, performance-based navigation. If they're able to smallen, if you will, if that's even a word, shorten vertical separation, what can you do? You can put more aircraft in the same airspace, making the airspace more efficient, right? So this is the experience for us, the end user, on all these benefits. This one has talking.
Welcome to Next Gen Flight 101. We're getting ready to push back from our gate on time and on schedule. As you settle in, our pilot is talking to air traffic control and making sure our flight plan is filed. It looks like a possible storm ahead may change our original route. With previous standard voice communication, there was only one way to receive a new route. Air traffic control would contact our pilot, advise them of the new route to avoid the weather. The pilot would then read back the long, complicated clearance. Next, the pilot would contact our airline operations center and review the same information before calling back to air traffic control again to accept the new path. If, in this lengthy process, the weather shifted, the whole process would need to start all over again. Thankfully, our flight is enabled with digital communications. Air traffic control is sending a digital message and communicating with the pilot and the airline operations center simultaneously in real time. Our pilot accepts the new flight path and loads it into the onboard computer. It's time to push back, and we're going to use collaborative communication tools that will give us a smoother transition from pushback to wheels up. This means that while our aircraft is still at the gate, it has already been assigned a spot in the queue for takeoff. This new virtual queue reduces the amount of time that our flight will have to wait with our engines running, saving fuel and reducing emissions. We don't want to push back then wait in line. Instead, we get our designated pushback time and proceed directly toward departure. By improving how we time our place in line, we reduce traffic congestion on the airport surface and improve traffic flows. So we have a digital clearance to our flight plan and have gotten in line for takeoff before we have even left the gate. Next-Gen Flight 101 is ready to roll toward departure. We've received our digital clearance, gotten in line without even leaving the gate, and are now rolling toward the runway for an on-time departure. While we are preparing the flight for departure, air traffic control is orchestrating the movement of very large and not so nimble aircraft on small and often constricted surfaces. New surface communication tools allow air traffic and airline operations to efficiently and safely time pushbacks and departures to avoid bottlenecks and congestion on taxiways and runways. Just like highway traffic uses an on-ramp to enter the freeway, aircraft use the runway to enter the overhead stream and head toward their destinations. Flowing aircraft efficiently off the runway keeps the entire system working. Because air traffic control is sending us on a precise and predictable path, we can use an additional departure path from our runway. The buffers needed when using conventional ground-based navigation tools are eliminated, and brand new on-ramps become available to us. Currently in use at Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, this new departure method can accommodate 8 to 12 more departures per hour. An improvement in efficiency at the world's busiest airport has a positive impact on the entire national airspace system. We are wheels up and heading to our destination. Let's see what additional improvements are impacting Next-Gen Flight 101.
This is your captain speaking, and I'm happy you've chosen to fly Next-Gen. We are now cruising at 35,000 feet with favorable winds. While your in-flight beverage service is being provided, we are using the new air traffic control system to find the most direct path or an alternate route to avoid weather systems. Our air traffic control centers are using a new system to process more data from radar and are tracking almost twice as many aircraft. This common vision allows the air traffic controller hundreds of miles away from our destination to see the weather that is slowing down operations at our final destination. Instead of letting us proceed at full speed ahead towards a congested airspace, we are getting small adjustments to our speed to ensure we arrive after the traffic is cleared and can proceed directly to the runway. We are going to ask that you go ahead and return to your seats and fasten your seat belts as we begin our initial approach. Our aircraft is being tracked through a combination of next-gen and GPS technology. Conventional radar works by emitting and receiving radio waves. Our flight is being tracked in real time and is seeing our flight from the top down, incorporating elements like weather, terrain, and other aircraft, giving me a much more precise and predictable view of what's ahead.
The captain has asked that you return to your seat. We are arriving at our destination. We will arrive today using a direct path that starts from hundreds of miles away and more than 20,000 feet. Instead of slowly approaching our destination by repeatedly descending and leveling off in a stair-step method, our new satellite arrival procedures enable our pilot to pull back the throttle and descend at near idle. This burns a fraction of the fuel and dramatically reduces aircraft exhaust emissions and noise. We can begin to descend higher, travel on a predictable path, and get you to your destination on time. Air traffic control has our flight sequenced to land in just a few minutes, on time and on schedule. Speed, weight, and wingspan impact the strength of the wake or turbulence an aircraft creates, and its reaction to the wake of an aircraft in front of it. The longer the required distance, the fewer aircraft can take off and land. We're coming in safely behind another flight, a process made possible after the FAA determined it was safe to decrease the distance between aircraft. Newer jets leave less wake, and the FAA has recategorized the separation standards, improving aircraft capacity and efficiency. In Memphis alone, these new procedures boosted capacity 20%, allowing 22 more arrivals per hour. With the tools and technology provided by the FAA, air and ground personnel can communicate collaboratively in anticipation of our arrival. If your flight lands early, you won't have to sit on the tarmac waiting for a gate. All parties are communicating in real time to ensure the efficiencies and optimization delivered by NextGen not only benefit the airspace, but enhance your traveling experience as well. We want to thank you for flying with us today on NextGen Flight 101. We know you have many choices when you fly, and we're glad you've chosen to fly with us in our modernized airspace system.
There, John. Next, John.
So, no.
So when we're coming through 18,000 feet, I have to adjust my altimeter. What's the lowest level of flight level? I don't know, bro. All right. One more national airspace system and how this thing works. The national airspace system is comprised of a multitude of different entities, right? The entities start in a working order. They would start with Flight Service Station. Flight Service Station is the people who are able to give weather briefings, come up with your clearance. They have the National Airspace System Flight Service Stations are connected through a link to everybody, and they're able to get people filtered in, right? After these folks, Flight Service Station, you, the pilot, would call up your clearance delivery to receive your clearance for your flight, including like if there's any ground holds, you get an anticipated release time. It would include your altitude. It would include everything in the craft format, right? Your clearance limit, your routing, your altitude, your frequency, your transponder code, all to make the things most efficient. So that's who gives your clearance. You would talk to ground, who is now already able to know when your taxi time is, when your gate release time is, when your departure time is, all the way up to the other folks who know what your arrival time should be based on real-time weather, right? So then you spoke now with Flight Service Station, with clearance delivery, with ground for your taxi. Next, air traffic control comes into play. They're the people who just release you, right? Clear for takeoff, ATC. ATC will now hand you off to the folks if in a full operational system, i.e. Bravo airspace. They would hand you off to these folks called TRACON, Terminal Radar Approach Control. They're also departure control, who would handle you in the terminal area of that immediate vicinity, and they would get you to the en route phase of flight to be able to hand you off to ARTCC, Air Route Traffic Control Center. They're the people who handle your en route phase of flight. And then on the reverse end now, you're coming into land in a full operational facility, i.e. Class Bravo, Charlie Airspace. ARTCC would hand you back off to TRACON, Terminal Approach Control, right? And this time you're the arrival, who would hand you off to ATC, who would hand you off to ground, and you're in. So those are the entities involved. Here's how the National Airspace System sort of works within that.
The FAA's mission is to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. We do. The FAA controls thousands of planes in the air at once, moving hundreds of millions of passengers a year, adding billions of dollars in air cargo and hundreds of thousands of private pilots. And you have a big challenge. Here's how it's handled. As passengers board a plane, the pilot files a flight plan with an air traffic controller and gets weather information. The plane won't taxi until a ground controller, keeping track of planes all over the airport, okays it.
Delta 2412, push approved, advise taxi.
That controller will direct the plane along taxiways to the runway, where a local controller, also in the tower, takes over. The local controller will safely guide the plane through takeoff and over a set course just beyond the airport's boundaries, where a TRACON controller takes over. The Terminal Radar Approach Control, or TRACON, may be at an airport or at another location that manages the approach and departure for many airports. Unlike tower controllers, TRACON controllers work exclusively from radar and have no windows to see planes, which could be more than 100 miles away. These controllers keep planes separated within about 50 miles of an airport's airspace at altitudes up to 17,000 feet. Beyond that, Enroute controllers manage the flights. Enroute controllers work at one of 21 air route traffic control centers across the country. Each Enroute center is responsible for defined areas of airspace with multiple sectors inside each center's airspace. Even though the sky seems boundless, teams of Enroute controllers keep planes flying in lines following fixed ground locations. Pilots stay fully advised as communications are handed off from controller to controller. As tower, TRACON, and Enroute controllers focus on planes, management teams help controllers at the Air Traffic Control System Command Center see the big picture. Command Center controllers don't speak directly to pilots. Instead, they coordinate nationally with airlines, fellow controllers, the military, and other users of the airspace to keep things moving safely and efficiently. As the plane descends, it will return to TRACON controllers, who steer it into line with other aircraft approaching the airport from different directions. The local tower controller takes over for the landing, and the ground controller guides the plane back to the gate. That's just a few of the more than 15,000 air traffic controllers keeping America's skies the safest and most efficient in the world.
All right, so those are the entities involved in the National Airspace System, right? So we've looked at next gen, we've discussed, well, now looked at how this thing works. Let me get rid of these videos that we have, but. And now let's look at departure procedures. We're only gonna look at them briefly because we are gonna revisit them, but just to show that looking at low altitude route charts and their altitude bases is gonna make looking at departure procedures fairly simplistic. Remember, DPs is the category, if you will, departure procedure. Under the DPs, there's two subsets, technically three, we'll get into the third one later. The two subsets will be an SID, Standardized Instrument Departure, a SID. The other type is an ODP, an Obstacle Departure Procedure. We're gonna look at a SID, okay? This is a preview for next week when we get more into DPs, and then we'll also look at STARS for next week. Good? Standard Terminal Arrivals, which are just the inverse. So, if we look at, we'll play this one. We'll play this one. We're gonna look at a departure, then we're gonna look at how a departure can be utilized with the next gen system to make the whole thing more efficient, if you will. So I'm going to go to AirNav now. AirNav is just, it's not for official use, but it is a way to rapidly look up everything that's found in the TERPS, Terminal Procedures publication. AirNav is where you'll find your standard instrument departures in graphical and textual format. So we can look up airports just for giggles. Let's look up San Diego. Down at the bottom, you're gonna see three different categories: standard terminal arrivals, instrument approach procedures, and departure procedures. We're going to look at the ZOO 3 departure. It's actually modified. There's been an amendment to it. We're gonna look at the ZOO departure, which is GPS based. However, just to look at this in a more simplified manner, let's look at the Border 7 departure. Where do you think that goes? Down along the border. So, if we look at that, you'll see kind of how simplistic this actually is and how it's labeled. This is a SID. This SID is denoted on one page. Some of them have 2 pages, i.e. the graphical representation and the textual representation. In order to be able to fly a SID, you have to have at least one of them on board. Let's see if I can get this to, is that legible? Mm-hmm. Is it blurry? Mm-hmm. No? Okay. So now, departures. Here's how this thing goes. Well, here's the airport. San Diego International. It's got kind of the same setup as an instrument approach procedure as the border or the margin identification. It tells you the airport it's into and out of. It tells you when it was amended, and it also gives you the name of the departure. This is how the departure would be put into a flight management system, i.e. you're on board. Try both radios, try everything, right? We're lost calm. We're in the clouds, and that's a huge part. Because if you weren't in the clouds, you just squawk 7600 and turn around. You're in the clouds. What are you gonna do? Well, I'm gonna go to 7600 on my code. You've already been quote unquote tagged up on 5211. The system sees 5211 change to 7600. They know they can't talk to you because SoCal's down there going, airplane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you can hear me, ident. Airplane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, SoCal. Airplane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, SoCal. Nobody's home. Airplane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you can hear me, make a 90-degree right turn. So they're trying these things. They're trying to radar identify you through a turn. They're trying to establish communications. Nobody's home. No communications. What do they expect you to do? They expect you to go to the highest of these three. MEA, expected or assigned. I would look at the route and I would say, well, the MEA is 3,000, 4,000. My assigned was 4,000. My expected was 4,000 here. In the clearance. I never got assigned a different altitude that's higher because I never talked to anyone. Okay, I'm gonna go, boom, 4,000 feet. Right off the bat. Okay, I'm at 4,000. So that's altitude. Now, routing. What do I do for the route? So altitude, question, route, what do I do? Well, you do one of these four, AVF, or Avenue F. What do you want to call it? AVEF. Assigned. Vectored. Expected. Or filed. Whatever the last thing you got was. It's not going to make too much sense right now for anybody. Because the last thing you got might have been expect the ILS. Or the last thing you might have got was turn 150 vectors for the RNAV 28. So whatever it is, right? In this case, we did get an assignment. That was our assigned route, right? They didn't say cleared as filed, they gave us a routing. So what am I gonna do? Well, I'm gonna turn to Oceanside on some stipulations. I'm gonna intercept Victor 2-3. I'm gonna follow Victor 2-3 to whatever the next VOR is, and then I'm gonna have to figure things out. And the cool part about the IFR system, National Airspace System under IFR, is this. There's always a way to figure out how to get on the ground in the event of lost comm, because that last point that you got assigned or you're going to always leads you in to an approach, always. It's kind of cool the way it works. But we'll get more into that one later. You have a question?
So like, let's say the MEA goes up and you're flying west and it's like 4,500.
You climb up to 4,500.
45, or would you fly over?
4,500.
Okay.
You fly the MEA
Okay.
if it's the highest altitude.
Yeah.
If you were assigned 6,
You fly 6.
you go to 6.
Yeah.
But you fly, and it's, let's just say you're going southeastbound, and the MEA is 8,300, and that's the highest altitude of everything that you got, you fly 8,300.
Okay.
Just think, that 8,300 might give you separation from the aircraft.
I've been assigned it.
Yeah.
And
You're
then
gonna
you
get
just-
assigned odd or even altitudes, but they want you at that altitude, if it's the highest of the three.
And then you can just continue your approach and land?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's fantastic going lost comm under IFR.
That's right. You got the...
No one's talking to me. I know what to do because the FAA told me what I need to do. Cool. They're not gonna box vector me around traffic. Guess what they're gonna do? Peel all the traffic away from me. Hey, look, this aircraft's squawking 7,600. He's lost comm. We can't do him. Airplane, make a right turn. Airplane, make a left turn. Let's make a big path for this guy to get in. Sweet. I get on the ground. I give him a call. Thanks, guys. What do I need to do for you? Oh, nothing. That was textbook. I've gotten that before. What do I need to do, guys? Nothing. That was textbook. Perfect. Good? There's your scenario. We're gonna get that into way, way more later, though, Sam. But that's a good question. Questions? Let's look at airports. Let's look at airports. Who has a low altitude route chart? Open them up to the legend. Legend. But I can look one up. You guys have a legend in front of you. So I'm just gonna go to here. I'm just gonna we're gonna look at different airports and the different designators for the airports, i.e. circles with tacks, double circles, blue or green. So let's just start with an airport that's familiar around here, Montgomery Field. It's got a circle with these 4 tacks around it. How does that identify the airport? What does the legend say about it?
Civil.
It says it's a civil airport. What else does it say about it? It says something about it has at least an instrument approach procedure or a radar approach. It says something of that effect.
Radar minimum.
It says radar minima is public. Read the whole thing.
Facilities in blue or green have an approved instrument approach procedure and or radar minima published in either the FAA terminal procedures publications or the DoD flips.
Okay, so that's blue or green. Airports in blue or green have either an instrument approach procedure published, or both, or radar minima published in the TERPS, Terminal Procedures publication. That's the book that has all your IAPs, or the DoD flips, the Flight Procedures publication. That's the DoD version of the TERPS, Terminal Procedures publication. What does it say about airports in green?
You mean blue?
It says blue.
We just did green.
So blue or green. So civil airport that has either or both a instrument approach procedure published or radar minimum. What does it say about blue?
Those in blue have an instrument approach procedure and or radar minimum published in at least the high altitude DoD flips.
Okay, so now they have a high altitude transition for the approach. So there's an approach or a radar minimum published in at least, what does it say again?
In at least the high altitude DoD.
In at least the high altitude DoD. So there's a high altitude transition, i.e. DoD aircraft from higher altitudes can be transitioned into an approach. Blue, right? What about the double blue, like a bullseye? What does that mean?
Civil military.
It's, what does it say?
Civil military.
That's military.
It says civil tac military.
No.
Oh, without the tacks. Right?
Without the tack marks.
Oh, just a circle, huh?
So double circles is just a military field. So here's a civilian field with an IAP published. Here's a military field with either or both a high altitude transition, right, for a radar minima or a instrument approach procedure. But now if we look up here, we actually do have some what are called joint use fields. And a joint use field would be like March. And March would be located right up here, like this. See, now this one is blue. It has 2 rings, but it also has the tack marks. So that one's joint use, civil military. So civilian instrument approach procedures published, military high altitude transition published, or radar minima for use of military or civilian field. UMA's the same. So if we go down, I don't know if UMA's on this chart.
Is the Yuma one the one that the military uses a lot because theirs gets plenty of traffic? There's one right over the mountains, one into the desert that gets used a lot. It's a pain in the ass sometimes to land there.
Right over the mountain. Yuma's one that's out there. But I'm not totally certain what you're referring to right over the mountain. Borrego Springs? That's right over the other side of the mountain.
Might be.
Here's another one, El Centro, military only, but no high altitude transition. It's not in blue. It's a military field though, so there's an instrument approach procedure published, or radar minima published, but no high altitude transition. Here's a civilian airport, instrument approach procedure published.
What's the difference between green and blue again? Sorry.
Green, high altitude transition. And what does it say again?
For
Read
blue,
it out.
Those in blue have an instrument approach procedure and or radar minima published at least in the high altitude DoD flips.
So there's a high altitude transition for an approach with an IAP published or radar minimum published.
Right. So that means when you're on a high altitude shot.
DOD, not gonna be you. Department of Defense, military.
Oh, okay, so it
Doesn't really affect you.
Right, okay.
So blue or green really doesn't affect you per se. It is the double bullseye, military only, single ring with the outside civilian, or joint use double bullseye with the tack marks. The blue has a high altitude transition. There's one more color of airports. I call this one poop factor. And there's one right up here. In the event, right here, civilian airport, but it's brown. What does it say about those published in brown?
Okay, so facilities in brown do not have published instrument approach procedure or radar minimum.
No radar minima, no approach. Why in the world, on a low altitude en route chart, IFR mind you, would they show a brown airport if there's no approach or radar minima published? Poop factor. Remember, you don't have to be in instrument meteorological conditions to be under IFR. What if I'm cruising through here and all of a sudden I have a power plant failure? Well, hey, look guys, there's an airport down there. We're in VMC conditions. I'm gonna go land. There's a runway length published. I believe it's 3,000 feet. Don't quote me on the number. This runway happens to be 4,900 feet because there's other airports out here. Right? Here's one published, but that one's green. It's got an approach. Anything brown? Yeah, here's another one. This runway, Hesperia, has a runway of 3,900 feet. In the event there is somewhere in fact to go, if you're under VFR conditions. There's an airport down there. I've lost my engine. I'm having a problem with one of my engines. Whatever the anomaly is. So those are the three colors of airports: blue, green, brown. Blue doesn't mean it's a military field. It just means there's a high altitude transition published. Military field is double circles. Green, there's an IAP or a radar minima published. If it's double bullseye with the tack marks, it's a dual use field. If it's brown, it means there's no IAP or radar minima published. However, there's an airport down there. Good? Again, this is one of those things where you come into class, we're discussing this. There might be one or two people in here who got it, locked, loaded, I'm done, I don't need to think about this again. But this is one of those things that we're previewing it. You guys are gonna have to review it 20 times in order to get it. So don't just think because we discussed it, you're gonna know, right? That's school. Other things on here.
Question.
Go for it.
So the high altitude approach, that's,
High altitude transition.
so going from flat level down to,
Let me look, I don't know. There's a terps right up here. Is there a terps right here?
you want?
I'll grab one out of the back.
I might. Who's got a local? So easy to find. Obviously, this isn't a FLIPS, flight procedures. This is the terminal procedures, U.S. Terminal Procedures publication, TERPS, TPP, some people I've heard call it. But the easy way to identify a high altitude transition is there is a line across the bottom that has hatch marks on it. And I'm gonna try to find one in here, if there even is one still in here. But there's hatches like a solid black bar that has lines over it. That means in this book, it's a high altitude transition, right here. That. There's a high altitude transition into this airport. That one happens to be on the terps, but the ones that they're referring to in the blues are out of the same book, but the same book that's used specifically for DoD, the FLIPS, Flight Procedures Publication. Good?
Yeah.
So that's actually kind of a gotcha question, because a lot of people don't know the answer, and that answer is kind of difficult to find. I'll ask that question to people quite often if they think they know. I'll be like, oh yeah, so you know everything about this, huh? What does that mean? Those had, oh. It's a good one. That's the high altitude transition.
But that's what I'm saying, it's from flight levels down to, yeah.
Some other things on this chart. Coloration is obvious.
So that's like at 18,000?
Flight levels. There's colors. There's blue shading, but with a solid blue line surrounding it. Conterminous, if you will. What does that blue shading with the solid blue line identify? Bravo airspace. Up here, there's blue shading, but with a tacked blue line. Charlie airspace. Right? So those are your shadings. What's this light green? Shoreline. Right? The coast. Shoreline. How about this tack green? That was a little less obvious, but it says on there. It's a different chart. So yeah, see this LA area chart, Alpha 2 for detail. There's the mode C veil, 30 nautical miles. So they're saying, hey, you're 30 nautical miles within a primary class Bravo airport. ADS-B out and mode C are required, even though everywhere's ADS-B out is required. Ours is mode C veil is a little bit interesting. And if you look at it in detail, it comes together and then goes apart again. What's that all about? Because we have split Bravo airspaces. We've got Bravo airspace primary surface area at Miramar. We have Bravo airspace primary surface area at San Diego. I.e., if I look on just a San Diego tack chart, the same thing exists. So if I took a compass and I spun 30 nautical miles off of Miramar, well, that's going to be the compass line, and the same thing ends over on this side. It comes together here. And if I took a compass and spun up a circle at 30 nautical miles off Lindbergh, that's where the two meet. So we have dual VOR, dual Bravo airports. That's where they come together. Low altitude route computer. If capable. There's two possibilities for departure out of San Diego International, an eastbound departure or a westbound departure. In a normal configuration for San Diego, you are a westbound departure, right? Typical day out of San Diego, unless you have really strong Santa Anas coming out of the east, or if you have really low overcast layers, you're typically going to be departing to the west. So here's what it looks like. You depart the runway. What heading are you on? Up to Hoagie, what's that variable for? DME. So you fly out on 278 up to the Hoagie VOR DME of 19. At that point, you make a left turn to a heading of to intercept the radial 260, which is a course of 080 to Hoagie VOR. Once you're at Hoagie VOR, left turn to a heading of 069 for 11 miles to Browse intersection. Now note, it says the Border 7 departure Browse. It gets you to Browse. Note that that portion of the departure of the SID is the heaviest set line. That's the SID. That's the departure procedure, the heaviest set line. Now we've got two thinner base lines here and here, which is considered to be the transition. So there's two possibilities of transitions here. There's a Julian transition or the Imperial transition. So here, the SID itself, the Hoagie or Border 7 departure, goes outbound 278 until you reach the Hoagie 19 DME, left turn to a heading of 123, outbound 080, radial 260 to intercept 069, outbound for 11 miles to Browse intersection, thence. Well, what's the MEA for if we did the Imperial transition? What's the MOCA? Heading and distance. Low altitude route charts. All right? So the imperial transition would be once at browse intersection, the 069 radial VHF. 7,000 is the minimum inter altitude. It's Victor 317. There's the changeover point out to imperial, and now you're in the structure. If we did a Julian transition, we would get to browse, make a left turn. What's your MEA? Mocha? Distance? And your heading? And you'd be outbound to Julian for the en route structure. That's the SID. The departure route description, the textual format, if you're taking off runway 27, which we just discussed, climb on a heading at 278 until Pogey, 19 DME, left turn to a heading at 123 to intercept Pogey Vortac radial 260 and radial 069 or to browse intersection, and thence, well, what's the thence? That's the transition or assigned routing. Maintain assigned altitude. Expect the filed altitude flight level 10 minutes after departure. Expect in the event of lost comm. All right? Assigned vector to expected file. It's already telling us, hey, what do I do if I get lost comm? Expect file altitude flight level. If you're doing the imperial transition, same from over browse on Pogey 069 Imperial 250 to Imperial Vortac. If you're doing the transition in Julian from over browse on the Julian 182 to JLA Vortac. That would be a traditional departure out of San Diego. There are some limitations on it. The limitations are all found.
And going from browse to Julian, you're not on a Victor Airway until you get to Julian and you go off on one probably?
I don't know, but my guess is no. Okay? Because this is denoting Victor 317. I don't believe this is an airway. It would probably denote it. Note, radar 9, radar is required. Note, runway 27 DME is required, obviously, to identify that DME value. And then they do have takeoff minimums. Remember we said 200 feet per nautical miles is standardized IFR minimum. However, if you're on runway 27, you have to have 400 foot ceiling with a 2.5 mile visibility, or standard, we'll discuss that one, with a minimum climb rate of 353 feet per nautical mile, it's 400 feet. So there are some possibilities that your aircraft won't be able to comply, and if it doesn't go by the standard departure, 200 feet per nautical mile, it will be denoted in minimums. Good? Simple, standardized instrument departure. So another one. This one's a little bit different because we're going to look at a RNAV departure now. An RNAV departure now versus utilizing traditional fixes based off of VHF navigation, i.e. VOR. Now we're utilizing what's called waypoints. These are waypoints. Waypoints are denoted via latitude, longitude coordinates that are assigned a 5-letter identification. There's 2 types of waypoints. These are fly-by waypoints, meaning that you don't have to be exactly over them. These are fly-over waypoints, a circle, meaning that you need to fly exactly over that waypoint jetty. The way this one goes, if you're a departure off runway 27, this one's utilized for takeoffs on runway 27. You'll fly outbound to jetty intersection, make a standard rate left turn to zoo intersection. The way these are denoted is the floor is 6,000, the tops are flight level 230. So you can't go above 230, but you can't be below 6,000. Maximum speed 230 knots. Once you get to zoo, you're outbound on a heading of 085 unless you're going to Senza. Your MEA is 7,000. Your MOCA value 3,900 for 17 miles to Georgie intersection, which they want you to cross at 14. Outbound from Georgie intersection, 14, again minimum, out to 066 to Grider intersection. And then if you're on the meatball transition or the Imperial transition, there was one earlier, Senza transition. Let's just look at the meatball transition. 15,000, 8,700 for the MOCA. 011 on the heading for 25 nautical to Piez intersection. Then MEA at 15, 83 comes down. 013 for 26 to Inchi. 15, 87 is your, again, MOCA 043 to Meatball. Note, for non-GPS equipment, aircraft using MEEPL or IPL, transition POD-DME must be operational. So there's a way to identify these intersections, not utilizing DME or GPS equipped. It does say here, area navigation 1. So RNAV 1, there's two subsets of area navigation, and basically it's just a database, RNAV 1, RNAV 2. It's a database that you can have on board your flight management system to be able to plug in Zoo 3. DME, inertial navigation or GPS. Radar required for non-GPS equipped aircraft. Whenever anything says radar required, it means the ground radar must be functional, not airborne radar. The reason why it says radar required for non-GPS aircraft is because ground radar could let you know, okay, you're now over Jet A intersection. So again, whenever it says radar required, it means ground radar must be functioning so they can identify your points. Route description, again, take off runway 27, climb and direct jetty, then left turn direct across Zoo between 6 and flight level 230, at or below 230. Thence, on your transition, there's the Senza, Imperial, or Meatball transition. Turbojets maintain flight level 230, turboprops 15,000, and then, in the event of lost comm, expect filed altitude 10 minutes after departure. That's it. That's how they're read. Go for it.
Instead of inputting each individual waypoint, is there a way that you can?
If you put in Zoo 3 departure on your RNAV 1, this pops up.
Just the same way you would put it in any other?
You got it. You got it. Go for it.
And that left turn after jetty.
Yep.
Do you get like a GPS turning? What do you call it? Like a
indicator.
Or
So that's
magenta line.
Yeah. Let's discuss that one later. That would be called an RTF, radius to fix, or an RF turn, radius to fix turn. However, everything in the IFR environment is done at standard rate.
So you just presume that's just standard rate.
Watch the video and you'll see a little something, right? Go for it.
For takeoff minimums, for runway 9 it says not applicable ATC.
Yeah, because this departure isn't primarily designed for runway 9.
So you just don't do it.
You're not doing it. Okay. Here's for, I like to bring my students, when they're working on their instruments, up to Van Nuys. And reason being is, this is for turbojet and jet aircraft. Up at Van Nuys, there is a departure, like if we look at Montgomery Field, let me just look at this for example. I want to fly out of IFR to Montgomery, however, I want to pick my departure procedure. What I do when I look at DPs is initially look at the notes right off the bat. What does a note say? Radar required, RNAV 1, GPS, DME, DMER, turbojet and turboprop only, never mind. I'm not doing this in my Cessna, okay? So that's one possibility of getting out of Montgomery via the Seaward 2. Where do you think it goes? Out towards the sea. So let's see the other possibility at Montgomery. Hey, look, there's the Padres 2 RNAV. RNAV could be GPS. Here's the Padres 2 departure. I'm gonna look right off the bat, I'm looking at the notes because I don't wanna waste my time. RNAV 1 radar, turbojets and turboprop, never mind. I can't do this in my aircraft. So there's not a lot, I mean, there's plenty of them, but there's not a lot of places that in a small light civil aircraft, like 160 horse aircraft, that in our local area is going to get assigned a SID based on RNAV. Hence the reason for my instrument students, I like to go up to Van Nuys because there is a departure. And it's the Canog, and I think it's the Canog 3 now. So now note, this one's a 2-pager. The first page is graphical demonstration, the second page is a textual demonstration, and here's the departure procedure. The boldest lines are the procedure itself. Wait a second, if I'm departing on whatever runway, right, the western runway, 253, or I'm sorry, the southern runway, let me say that one more time. The north facing runway, I make a left turn to 253, but then it doesn't say for me to do anything. It just says, hey, that's the departure procedure. That's the boldest line. Southern runways, well, it's 163 up until 2.2 miles. But at 1.5, it's at or below 1,750 feet. That's the line above. can't go above 1750. So I depart, I stay below 1750 up to 1.5, and then I continue my climb to 2.2 DME on heading 163, then I make a right turn 213. But then what do I do? So now, the textual format, because there's definitely a lot of transitions. There's an Avenal transition, there might be a Gorman transition, looks like there's a Fillmore transition, but it doesn't tell me what else to do. So, if I come back and look at the textual demonstration, here's my transitions. Take off runway 16 left, climb on 163 until Van Nuys 2.2, then climbing right turn 213 for radar vectors to EPO. Or take off 34, same thing. On transition or assigned route, maintain ATC assigned altitude. Expect filed altitude flight level 10 minutes after departure. Hey, look at that. Lost comms. Every one of these is telling us the what if factor. If we go lost comm, if not in contact with departure within 3 nautical miles, here's what they want you to do. And then there's your transitions. Okay, so there's the 2-page format. In this case, you'd obviously have to have both pages, but that is a preview of SIDs. Fairly simple to read. Now that you guys have kind of seen the altitude and route charts, let's watch a video on that zoo departure.
Welcome to the Southern California Metroplex Community Engagement Video Series. This animation presents information on the new zoo departure procedure at San Diego International Airport. The FAA design team developed the new zoo departure procedure in order to mitigate overall conflicts and complexity in the airspace. This new procedure also incorporated community input gathered during the environmental process. Zoo will mirror the existing POGI departure that is in effect today and remains in compliance with existing noise procedures. The initial waypoint past the shoreline for both procedures is Jetty, located 1.5 miles offshore. The location of the zoo path will route aircraft further to the south of the current POGI path. Aircraft will depart runway 27, heading 275 to Jetty. Aircraft fly over the waypoint before turning south and continuing an optimized climb. Once past Jetty, aircraft will fly a dispersed path to the zoo waypoint that varies depending upon the aircraft's speed and performance, continuing to follow a path in accordance with the existing noise procedures. After turning east past zoo, most aircraft are anticipated to cross the shoreline above 12,000 feet, continuing the optimized climb until reaching cruising altitude. In accordance with current noise procedures, the FAA depicts points on the Southern California TRACON air traffic control radar screens to reinforce the location of the shoreline. This emphasizes the minimum distance that controllers should leave departures on westerly headings before turning eastbound. The radar markings ensure that aircraft remain south of the Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. Controllers will continue to adhere to FAA facility directives by ensuring that aircraft remain west of the reference points except when weather or traffic requires alternative actions. Currently, aircraft departing from San Diego and routed for destinations to the east are assigned the POGI departure. The FAA design team identified inefficiencies and complexities due to the interactions with San Diego arrival traffic and traffic from other airport operations from North Island Airport, Brownfield, and a parachute jump zone. The routing for zoo along with other Metroplex procedures are designed to provide for reduced complexity and added flexibility for controllers when separating San Diego departures from other airport traffic. The design of the procedures will allow for more unrestricted climbs for zoo departures. The majority of aircraft will fly the new zoo path as described. As with the current POGI procedure, controllers will still need to, when required, direct aircraft on paths that deviate from the full route. Controllers continually direct aircraft as a result of weather and to maintain safe separation, sequencing, and efficiency throughout the flight. This can occur for most slow-moving propeller aircraft that are often turned before the shoreline. Also, when the airport is in opposite direction operations, where aircraft land and depart in opposite directions. During this seldom used configuration, departures may be turned early to maintain separation and sequencing for the arrivals. Another example is that controllers may also direct aircraft when past jetty to fly directly to a specific waypoint along the zoo procedure path. This is a common action done by controllers to maintain safe separation and operational efficiency. This is expected to occur at the same level that occurs today, with the majority of operations following the path as shown. The team will continue to monitor all procedures post-implementation to ensure the validity of designs. For more information and additional animations on the Southern California Metroplex, please visit our website.
Those are SIDs. That's utilizing NextGen with RNAV to implement a SID to increase the efficiencies. Good? So for next week, we're gonna look at more departure procedures. We're also gonna look at a different type of departure procedure called an ODP. I'm also gonna talk about something called DVA, diverse vector area. That's a departure procedure utilizing TRACON when they can vector the aircraft below specific altitudes. Okay? So the plan for next week would be to look at SIDs, finish SIDs, look at ODPs, finish ODPs, take 2 seconds to talk about diverse vector area, and then get into standard terminal arrival routes, or STARS. Once we look at DPs, I think STARS aren't gonna take very long. So if that's the case, and we're able to get that completed, we're going to begin with chapter, that would be chapter chart again. Hold. Incidentally, any turn to the right under IFR is normal. Any turn to the left under VFR is normal. Just bank that. Some other things. Here's a kind of a new one, MON. I think I discussed this a little bit last week. Minimum Operational Network, MON. That's kind of new. Minimum Operational Network means this: the FAA is planning on decommissioning a ton of VORs. Exact number, I'm not gonna quote. In excess of 200. Okay? They wanna get rid of VORs. Why?
Going GPS.
It's going to GPS because there's, well, better coverage. Why else?
Request physical infrastructure.
It costs money to maintain these things, right? It costs money to update these things. They have to monitor them constantly. So if you see like unmonitored, it doesn't mean that it's not in service for a VOR, but if it says unmonitored, it means this, that the signal sent to the FAA saying, hey, I'm broken, isn't being sent. It's the pilot that finds out if it's working or not, okay? It costs land, right? So infrastructure, cash to maintain and for the land use, maintenance, so forth, and the inaccuracies of it. So they're trying to decommission these things, but here's what MON is doing. Minimum Operational Network is saying this: we recognize we're decommissioning VORs in the national airspace structure. However, we also recognize, like it's happened once on 9/11, when the Department of Defense, who's in control of our global navigation satellite system, which happens to be called GPS, right, for us. Remember, there's 2 others, Galileo and GLONASS. Ours is GPS. They're saying, in the event that the DoD has to shut our global navigation satellite system down, our GPS gets turned off, the FAA is going to guarantee a minimum operational network of airports that they're going to maintain via a VOR Enroute structure via VHF, VOR. You're going to be able to navigate via VHF or VOR structure to that airport and get onto the ground utilizing VHF. ILS localizer, which I know we haven't discussed yet. So in the event of GPS failure or it gets turned off, they're guaranteeing a way of aircraft to get on the ground safely by reverting to VHF, and they're going to maintain that system. Minimum Operational Network. That's MON. We'll discuss that more later. Airport identification stuff, if you will. So this airport's part of the minimum operational network system. It's McClellan Palomar. Its identifier is CRQ. What do you think the D stands for?
Delta.
It's Delta Airspace. What about the star? It's part-time. 331,
Elevation.
airport elevation. L, pilot controlled lighting. 49, length of the longest runway. ATIS is found on frequency 120.15. Okay, so that's how you read those. I mean, we can even get crazy, look at LAX. And if we go up here and we look at LAX's airport information, no special VFR into LAX. Wait a second. Where's LA's information? Well, that's weird. Oh, wait. See LA area chart alpha 2 for detail. Good?
So is that, that chart that's referring to, is that from IFR chart
Yeah.
as well?
Yep. Okay, that'd be your supplement. I'm trying to think. Okay, so here's something that we haven't discussed yet. So take this, not with a grain of salt, but take this for further information. These barb looking things, these hatched marks. Here, these hatched marks. Not every airport has one on it as far as identification on the low altitude and route chart, like this hatched mark thing. Everyone sees what I'm referring to? Like the feather. That identifies what's called a localizer. A localizer is an array, a VHF array that emanates a signal to be used for guidance via VHF as an approach, okay? For example, and again, this isn't gonna make too much sense, but it's definitely gonna come into play later. For example, Montgomery Field has a localizer, but it doesn't show this barbed array. It doesn't show this feather, if you will. The reason for it is that signal being emanated from the airport surface out, used as guidance for an instrument approach. On the low altitude and route chart, that signal can be utilized for other information for the en route structure. i.e., I can use the signal off of the localizer at Gillespie Field to identify an intersection. So I can use the localizer signal for en route flight guidance, if you will, or activity for the low altitude and route chart. So I can use an approach VHF radio signal to help me identify intersections in the en route structure. Sam?
So it doesn't show you radials, it shows you the direct bearing?
It shows you the direct bearing. Correct. So if I dialed in the localizer, but that's something else, if I dialed in the localizer, it only has one course. So if I dialed in the localizer frequency into Gillespie, 110.5, ISE, the instrument system into Gillespie Field, that's what the I stands for. If I dial that in, it's only gonna emanate that one course no matter what I put on the OBS. It doesn't matter, it's gonna emanate 269 out. So, or 2692, 089 out. I can use that to identify Barrett intersection at 16 miles on Victor 466. Again, that will make more sense later. But just going over the marks on the low altitude and route chart. I think that's pretty much everything here. Restricted airspace, denoted. Restricted airspace. These brown lines are control areas, really not a factor for us right now. We'll get into those later if we get into those. The ATIS down here, right? The air defense identification zone. It shows us what it is. There are frequencies listed. In this case, this is in the scalloped boxes. The frequency listed is Los Angeles Center. So the only frequencies really listed besides airport, ATIS, and that's really it, airport ATIS frequencies, and ILS frequencies, and VOR frequencies, the people we can talk to is gonna be Center. This happens to be LA Center, part of ARTCC, Air Route Traffic Control Center, and their radar is located in the Laguna Mountains. So that's how those are denoted. So if you see any of those scallop boxes, like here, LA Center, they're located at Pleasants Peak. There's their frequency. Homeland, low VOR. I think we covered everything. Low altitude route charts. Good? Questions? Go for
I
it.
was just kind of wondering why the Victor Airways seems to have like more numbers on them.
That's a continuance,
Okay.
i.e. Victor here, 8. It turns into some point Victor 21 or Victor 394. So if we look here, Victor 8 outbound, hey, look at that. It turns off to Victor 394. Or if I take Victor 8 outbound, well, there's a continuance here, Victor 8 to Victor 21. It's going to change into, hey, look, there's Victor 8, 21. It's going to turn into Victor 21 somewhere.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's a continuance. It would be like me saying, I want you to take I-8 west to 15 north.
Okay.
Good?
Yeah, thank you.
Questions on any of this? Go for it.
So regarding that, if you were to go from V8 and you continue to 2-1,
Yep.
Since there's no like, I guess, changeover point, when you do change midway between the two VRRs, will you read 2-1?
Say that question again.
Like when you put on your OBS, you start off on you go from the VR, which is V8, but then midway between those two VRs, you switch over to 2-1 midway.
Let me show you an example. Victor 66 eastbound. Victor 66 eastbound. It's the 076 radial. So you'd put 076 in, right, on your OBS, off of Mission Bay. So I'm eastbound on Victor 66. Well, here goes Victor 460. So what would I have to do to utilize it? Well, I would have to switch the VOR to now go to Julian for Victor 460, and I would put the inverse of 170 in, which would be 350. Does that make sense?
So it's not like related to the Victor numbers.
No, the radial isn't really related to the Victor number, besides the fact that east-west are typically, if you look here, east-west are typically even numbers, north-south are typically odd, just like the freeway system in the United States for interstate freeways. Even are east and west, odd or north and south. So that's how the airways are kind of designated. But no, it's not in relation to OBS selection, bearing selection off of VOR, nor is it related to the VOR selection. That's you, right? That's like in the lab when we're going Victor 66 east to Hale, and then we make a southbound turn to 156 to track Hale. You just actually navigated Victor 66 to Victor 186. Make sense? Did that clarify it? Questions? Go for it.
Can you restate the difference between the green and blue airports again?
Green airports. Who can tell me?
It's instrument approach published.
Instrument IAP published or a radar minimum. What does it say? Read it again.
So blue and green have approved instrument approach procedure and or radar minimum published in either the FAA terminal procedures publication or the DoD books.
Okay, then blue.
The blue ones have an approach, the instrument approach procedure and or radar minimum published in at least the high altitude DoD books.
Got it, Ethan?
Yeah.
Blue have a high altitude transition published. Green have IAP, or, and a radar minimum published. Go for it.
Can you go over the difference between an RNAV route and VOR?
Yeah, so the VOR routing is strictly VHF. So the Victor airways are based off of VOR. The airways from VOR to VOR with segments in between. VHF frequency. The Tango routes, the blue ones, are GPS based. So you're using satellite, not VHF. You're using satellite to identify the intersection and the GPS to navigate you. Good? Area navigation. Questions?
And why is there such a difference between the two in terms of the route?
This question's gonna be kind of hard to answer. Well, it's not gonna be, just because of the fact that one's utilizing GPS when you utilizing VHF. Here's what's gonna happen. The black lines are gonna go away fairly rapidly. The blue lines are gonna start to become more predominant. The blue lines can be used on something called PBN, performance-based navigation. Performance-based navigation is based on the performance of the aircraft itself, based on the capacity that the airplane has. i.e., if I'm in cell mode on my phone and I go home and it says, to increase your location accuracy, turn on your Wi-Fi, right? So performance-based navigation based on performance, RNP. Different aircraft have different capacities, so that's PBN, performance-based navigation. And the routings on GPS, since your performance-based navigation, GPS is more accurate than VOR. The VOR is allowed to be 4 degrees off. It's allowed to be, right? And a degree off at 60 miles is a mile off course. VOR is not accurate at all. They're allowed to tighten up, if you will, the clearances from other obstacles because you are on GPS airways. That being said, black's gonna go away. We're gonna have more blues because there's more blue capable aircraft, RNAV, PBN, performance-based navigation capable aircraft, especially for the whole system that the FAA wants to call next gen, or is calling next gen. I know that was kind of a roundabout answer.
So is the benefit fuel consumption? I mean,
The benefit
if you're
is
more
alternate routes. The benefit is easier to control. 6. We're going to begin with chapter 7, approach charts. Good? So we're gonna finish departures, arrivals. We're not gonna talk about holding yet. Holding is in chapter 5. Don't worry about that yet. And then we're gonna get into chapter 7. Good? Questions? Anything? Sam? I know there's one coming.
Thank you.
Well, you good?
Yeah, so most, the way I'm understanding is most of those SIDs are made for turbojets.
A lot of them are.
A lot of them are.
But
So,
not
like,
all.
But if you, I imagine if you're looking at a smaller airport, I imagine they accommodate. So if you're doing a flight plan, would it be kind of like make sense to file a SID as your departure, whatever airport is for your arrival, and then in between you just.
Correct.
Okay.
There is a potential for, so you can file a SID or they can assign it to you, right?
Oh,
That's
so
one
they
part
just
about
straight up
SID.
assign it to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but it would behoove you to look into pre-flight planning to look, see what the capacity of the SIDs are, to be aware, hey, what might I get here? We're gonna talk about that one more next week. Any other questions? All right, I'll